In this episode of the Real Sales Manager podcast, it was a great delight to have a wide-ranging conversation with Scott Cassie. Scott's a hugely experienced and very successful sales leader working in the financial services space with people such as Standard & Poor's and Fitch Ratings. We covered lots of ground and there are some great sound bites. One of Scott's many claims to fame is in having successfully managed new business sales as well as relationship management, which in many industries is called account management or client management. So we discussed the differences in managing those two types of teams, what you look for in salespeople, how to manage those different individuals, and the differing challenges that come up. There were so many words of wisdom and lots of practical advice. My personal greatest learning was in reflecting on the support that new sales managers should seek to nurture from colleagues, from HR partners, and through affinity groups. Enjoy. So Scott, thank you ever so much for spending time to come on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation to get your perspectives. We're focusing on new sales managers, and what I'd like to do is maybe just discuss sales management in general with a couple of standard questions to get us started. But I'm going to be really interested in your perspective on the difference between managing new business sales teams versus relationship-based sales teams. I know you've got a lot of experience there, and it's a debate that we often have.
How
but
true.
But very few sales managers have had the in-depth experience that you've had. Anyway, if I could start with the standard question, which is just, can you tell us, about your journey into sales leadership, how you arrived into sales leadership in the first place?
Well, in the first place, I think the best thing to start with is working at a restaurant, making my way through college. If you think about it, and I sort of reflected on this, if you are working in the dining room and you have a station, you have a number of different tables, they're all in the different stage of the sales process, so to speak. Have they started on a cocktail? How are they having dessert? Are they on their entree? The analogy would be you have a portfolio of companies, all of which are in the different position within the sales process. You have to keep track of them. You also have to manage the kitchen internally, so there's an internal management or delicate dance as well as working with the client. And then what you want to do is you want to enhance the share of wallet or increase the total bill. And I will tell you, Steve, the best way to do that is to sell dessert. But that's another story. But again, then I was at the one restaurant where I was working, they asked if I would become the head waiter. In other words, watching the overall flow of the entire dining room while still maintaining a station. So that is a field general or a player coach type position. And that's the type of role I've always had in sales. I started out as more of an analytical position and realized over the first few years that I really enjoyed being with clients, being out there, new business development, developing additional business with existing customers. And that's when I felt I really started hitting my stride. I became a first-level sales manager when the global head of my function was looking for somebody to take over the role of North America. And I was one of the top salespeople, and therefore most people said, as he told me later on, well, if you're going to have somebody, why aren't you going to do Scott? He's pretty much doing it already. Not really. It was a nice compliment, but nonetheless, as a new sales manager, I did feel that I still needed a lot more to learn before really mastering something like that. But that's pretty much the story in a nutshell, but I thought that would be helpful.
No, that's the restaurant analogy is one. I will use that, Scott. Thank you for that. And yes, you talk about that delicate dance. That's a nice phrase as well, both clearly with the client, with the customer, but also with the rest of the organization. So that brings that nicely into focus.
Yeah, and if you think about it, you have to sell your company to the client, but normally, especially in finance, you have to turn around and sell the client to your client to your company to make sure that it matches their needs. So there's that being in the middle.
Oh, okay. That's, very nicely put. So it sounds like, as with most people, you were successful as a salesperson and then kind of just moved into sales management. But what attracted you to sales management? You could have said no. You could have said, I'm very happy being an individual contributor, making money, doing whatever. But what is it about? I
think the attraction for me, Steve, was really being in more of a formal position to help my colleagues succeed.
Okay.
One of your other speakers who you worked with mentioned that there's a lot of selflessness in a sales management role. I thought that was a fascinating way to put it. It's really not all about you. It's about the growth of your colleagues and also the growth of the function overall in order to benefit your company altogether. So the ability to help others continue to succeed or to enhance their growth was really something that drew me to the role.
Okay, I think that's essential. I'd like to come back to what you think of the essential qualities for a sales manager, but that there is something there. But you said you moved into the role and realised you had a lot to learn. A lot of people struggle with, as a salesperson, obviously successful. You've gone through the learning curve. You're good at what you do. You've got the recognition. All of a sudden to go into a different role where you don't know everything, you will struggle. How did you cope with that emotionally? Because I know a lot of people, it's a bigger move than we realise often. Is that the case? Was that the case for you, or did it just kind of happen naturally?
Oh no, it was not just. It just happened. There were two things I realized that I needed to find out a little bit more about. When I was first given the position, the global head turned to me and said, "What do you need?"
Right.
And my point was, I've had a lot of sales training, but not a lot of management training.
Right.
And I had a feeling there was something much different between sales, just doing sales, and leading salespeople in management. And the people aspect of it, of getting the best out of each person, learning how to flex your style of management, that was something that I came to understand was what I really needed to work at. It's one thing to do sales and you can flex your style in front of a client, but on a day-to-day basis, working with each individual was a big challenge.
Right.
And the other thing was really understanding that I don't know everything, and that's okay. I don't have all the answers as the manager or as the team lead. And it's okay to say, what do you think? Or let me get back to you. I have an idea where to go find that answer for you. If you don't have it on the tip of your tongue, that's fine. And that was another big issue, to feel like, well, if I'm here, I should be able to have all the answers and help everybody immediately. And that's just, I don't think, and if somebody does have that ability, it's fantastic. But that's something that a lot of us have to grow into.
And maybe we'll come on to this later, but in some ways I think it's, if you have all the answers and can give them straight away, that's not always the best way to help people develop. I mean, often with coaching, we hold back, even when we think we know the answers. Okay. My second standard question is to ask you to reflect back and think, what do you think are the essential characteristics or traits of somebody moving into sales management? You obviously had some natural ability as well as your sales success. But looking back, what would you say now that you would look for in a new sales manager?
I would say the first is to be a very good listener.
Okay.
That wouldn't be a surprise to many people. But the listening is a larger component of the ability to communicate. And I would say communicating clearly and often with your team is key.
Right.
And the other big trait I realized is empathy.
Okay.
Now, there are training programs about thinking about being in the other person's shoes. You need to understand your team. There's a lot of things about the people involved, not just getting to the sales number. And how can you help that person get there? You really need to understand the whole person, what's going on in their personal lives, and getting that level of trust with them that they can come to and say, this is getting in the way right now. It has nothing to do with work, but can you help me with this? And that doesn't mean I can help a personal issue, but I might be able to give them a day off because they need to do something. Or it might be training where they feel that they're missing something. But you wouldn't know that unless you took a step back, listened completely, hearing everything they're saying. Again, listening, not just hearing. I think those are the 2 points that really get you started off well.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing about empathy, a number of people talk to me about that. Is there a danger that you can go too far and empathy becomes sympathy and sometimes people look to you to solve all their problems and you can end up being the agony aunt or whatever. Is that a danger for you, or are you able to get that balance right?
It was a danger for me, Steve. It's a good point to make. Somewhere along the line, you have to say, this is a business, it's not a family. A family supports its weakest component, which is a good thing. But business can't really do that to the nth degree. And I think one of the challenges I had was when I first had an underperformer. I feel that I spent too much time with that person and suddenly realized I was neglecting the high achievers, the high potentials. And if you're not giving them the time that they need, well, a high achiever, you might lose them if they feel they're not getting the attention that they feel that they deserve. But the high potentials are the people who are growing. And you have a better opportunity for success for your team. So at some point, you can be as empathetic and as sympathetic up to a point. But a person has to help themselves. And again, I hope that doesn't sound too harsh, but as the manager, you really have to do that balance because you can't lose everyone else for the sake of one.
And I mean, I remember my first sales management role, the underperformers were a kind of challenge. And of course I can help these people. But I like the point you just said at the end there, that it's their responsibility. As the manager, you're there to help, but they have to take on the responsibility themselves. Okay, what was the biggest surprise moving into management for you?
How much time I needed to spend with my management. It really was. I was so used to being out in the field, reporting back all the good news or some of the challenge with customers, things like that. But I really needed to spend more time with my leadership. They were really unfamiliar with the role, if I came to think about it. Coming in a financial services world, most of the leadership are former analysts, just sort of a natural cause. They're not necessarily salespeople, or they're not necessarily at the coalface type individuals. So to try to manage what their needs and their demands are and understanding what their goals are and their key performance indicators. And that balance between what I feel my team can accomplish and what they feel they need, especially if you're going into annual planning, it's a respectful friction, I would say.
Yeah, there is some natural contention there, obviously, isn't there? Okay, and how do you then balance, I understand what you're saying, but how do you balance that internal managing upwards, which sometimes can stray into politics? How do you manage that with the day-to-day of your team who are out there in front of clients and they have their needs? How do you cope with that?
And again, through this whole conversation, don't think I came up with all these ideas on my own. I was talking with friends and other colleagues who had done this before. So please, I don't want to short-sight them. One person suggested well, how are you communicating on a regular basis upwards past your first line manager? And so I started, especially in my last role, where the position didn't really exist before, nor did the team, I started a monthly activity report that was not only what, but the why. So sales are doing well because, or this sale came in because, or we had this loss because. And that allowed me, I did not circumvent my first line manager. He happened to be a gentleman. He got it first, but then I also sent it forward. And then asked, what else do you need from me? What other information do you want? Is this too much? Would you like to see something else? And therefore that allowed, again, that communicating clearly and often was really something that I think was a breakthrough when I was a first line manager, because I didn't realize how intently some of the people above my manager were focusing on certain things and what they did want to hear about.
Interesting, and a good example of where you putting in a simple process can help you so much. And I see sales managers struggling with that all the time. And it's interesting. You said you talk to other people, and that's how you develop. For you, what I mean, and this is, I guess, very personal. But how do you personally learn and develop? Are there particular books that have inspired you, or videos, or people, or is it just getting coaching? What works for you?
Well, the first thing that started it all out, I had a manager when I was at Standard & Poor's, I'll just put it out there. His name was Hugh Baxter, and he really had a knack for talent management and talent development. And that really put the interest in me as to how to do that. And he was finding certain individuals or certain companies where, listening to his sales managers and his team leaders, he was looking for gaps in understanding and training. So he would bring us all together in semi-annual meetings from around the world, and we would all sit together and we would all take these courses. But what I would say, the white space around the course itself was the biggest value. All of us talking to each other. And when I'm talking to my colleague who's running Australia, I'm like, that's a great idea. I never thought of that. And that's where it all came. A lot of that, when you don't have time because you're constantly doing your day job, to be able to sit back even 500 feet above the coalface and say, wow, I wonder whether that would work. The other thing, especially for new sales managers, is a book called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. Invaluable. Someone gave it to me when I just recently changed roles, and it goes through what you might want to think about achieving or having an idea about the first 30, 60, 90 days as you go. And it also talks about if you're already with your firm and you are elevated to that first level position. And I thought through scenarios of what went on, I thought that was really, really helpful. It's not a very long book, but definitely worth the read. And I've got one that's dog-eared and underlined all over the place. I look at it all the time.
Okay. I think I have it somewhere. I'm looking around my office now, but I'll put it in the show notes for folks. Okay, excellent. So maybe this is an aside, I don't know, but that white space, you call it, around the meetings and the trainings, so I know I've learned that. Are we still able to do that, post-COVID, where everything's on this kind of platform? The opportunities for travel are probably in most organizations not the way they were a few years ago. Are we still able to learn in that way and develop ourselves, do you think?
The ability to use Zoom is fantastic.
Right.
But if you think about level of context of a conversation, you go from highest being face-to-face, then Zoom, then phone, then text, then whatever. You lose that as you go. I was able to persuade my leadership in my last role after COVID broke that we could get together. But I made sure that it was cost effective. And at the same time, explaining that, yes, we're getting together, here's the agenda of what we're going to talk about. And when they said, well, how come it's not wall-to-wall discussion? The reason being, since my team was virtual to begin with, I said, we need the time to literally get to know each other, but also talk about things that I'm not leading. And whenever I would have a team meeting, I always put it on Zoom, by the way, so that way, even though there were a majority of people in my office in New York, that put all of us on the same footing. We were all a box. And I thought that was very important. So everyone could speak, not thinking that, well, I'm not in the room. I was uncomfortable with that. But again, they knew when I started any of the meetings, I would always begin with, is there anything that you think we should talk about? And that way, whatever's on their mind doesn't get steamrolled over by whatever I think the agenda should be. Again, I don't know everything as the manager, but unless somebody tells me if there's a problem, I can't fix anything. So that's where I had all of my colleagues have a chance to say, and I sometimes they knew they could always ping me before the meeting and send me a quick email and say, I'd like to talk about this, can you put this on the agenda? And then I would also have them lead that part of the conversation. So they had ownership, and it was their opportunity to talk and speak in front of the group.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you're giving up control, maybe to get some overall control, I don't know, but I mean, that's quite brave to say, what's important to you guys, and let them almost dictate the agenda.
And Steve, that was really a challenge for me in a growth position, because when I first had my team leadership role at one of my first companies where I was a team leader, I had a member of the team who I'd say loved to throw hand grenades into the middle of the room. He would throw something that would throw everybody off kilter and then sit back and sort of laugh and watch. And I wound up working with a career coach on that and saying, well, this is what happens. And they said, well, how do you feel about that? And I said, I feel like I've completely lost control. I've lost confidence in my ability to provide value in the meeting and things like that. And it happened to be a woman, and she said, next time that happens, why don't you turn to the person and say, that's really interesting. Follow up on that for us, and take us through your thinking on that, which then put them in the position to then have to step up, and instead of just enjoy watching everybody scramble, they need to take ownership of what they just said and explain why they think we should be changing things, or whether that works or something different works for them. And that was a huge growth situation, and that's when I started feeling comfortable giving up the reins in a team meeting.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think it's a big learning for all of us is when we don't have to have the answers, we don't have to dominate. It's just managing that process, managing the people, and the task will almost manage itself if you do that. But it's a hard lesson that all of us go through.
It is really, and I felt that it was a great success of mine when my last North American overall manager, in a manager meeting said, all you guys might want to sit in on one of Scott's team meetings, because everybody's talking, the level of communication across the team is fantastic, and you learn so much from everybody else on that call. And I was like, never thought about it that way. But when he said it to everybody else, it sort of validated the fact that that's my style and how I wanted other people to do that after all the years of learning. And therefore, my team felt, I don't want to say safe, but they felt like it was a trusted environment. Everybody wasn't going to turn and say, that's a dumb idea. They said, that's interesting. Why did that work? It also got a chance for people to be highlighted and be spotlighted, which was great for them.
That's brilliant. Presumably it takes a while to get there. I mean, the first time you do it with the team, they're not quite sure. They're used to different types of management styles, but you have to persevere a little bit, I guess.
And especially since in my last role, I was an outside hire, brought in to be pretty much not an evolutionary change in the new team that was just thrown together, but be a revolutionary change. So I had to be very careful as to what should I push on and what should I not push on. And that's where I was always asking the team members, so what does this mean? Why do we do it that way here? And that's in the first 90 days about how to come in as a new
Yeah,
person, completely blind. You had an
Yes.
idea of what the role was when you were hired and during the interview process. But when you
Yeah.
finally, and the first thing you want to do is speak to all of the individuals on the team one-on-one and say,
Yes.
how does this work for you? Why are you
Yeah.
why do you like being on this team? What are some of the challenges
Yeah.
of this role? And
Yeah.
slowly but surely, you really have to gain trust. And you sort of have to gain it quickly in order for
Yeah,
that to work.
Yeah, particularly when you are, you have some management experience and some credibility, I guess.
Yes.
But you still have to, we say here, earn your spurs. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and yet there's probably pressure on you to make changes quickly and to turn something around or whatever.
Because the leadership who hired you are going to turn to you within like 60 days or so and say, so what do you think? And
Yeah.
what are you going to do? And you want to
Yes.
find some win or something within at least the first 90 days. And again,
Yeah.
going back to the book, what are you going to present, at least as an operating plan, a first
Okay.
draft, to say, this
Yeah.
is what I'm hearing, and from you, what you, my new leadership told me, and then what my team has told me, I feel we can find a balance and be able to move forward on a couple of these things.
Yeah, because almost certainly, I'd be interested in your experience. There's a gap between what senior leadership have explained to you and their expectations, and then, as you say, once you actually look in the whites of their eyes
Yeah.
and figure out what's really going on, there's almost certainly a gap.
And I think that that's fair of senior leadership. That's not a criticism. If
Oh,
they
yeah.
are not, and again, I've always said I've been a great field general. I love being there. But if there was no one reporting up to them, and not sugarcoating anything, but if they're not
Yeah.
getting the communication, they're not quite sure what's happening.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's where, when you come in, the first thing is, this is my first observation. This is my first crack at it.
Yeah.
Is this what you've heard before, or how can I help you better understand what I'm seeing, or am I seeing it wrong?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's, again,
Yeah.
that communication upwards as well as the communication with your team.
To
help them.
absolutely.
To help the team.
Yeah. But the worst thing you can do is just sit there by yourself and try and figure it out. And yeah, it's all about expectation management. It's maybe a separate topic, but yeah, in my experience, senior leadership can make unreasonable demands. In some ways, they have to do that. JFK saying we're going to put a man on the moon, it's a totally unreasonable thing to do, but has this effect. I'm not sure as a first line manager you can be unreasonable. You can stretch people and challenge them, but okay.
But I also, while you're on that topic, Steve, I think there's something where there's a yin and yang. And I felt with my leadership, they used to say, here's this great idea.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I can make that happen. I might not come up with the idea, but once you tell me what you're thinking, I can make that happen. And that's probably the difference between being higher up, because you can see at the 50,000 foot level the overall goals.
Yes.
And that's great, put a man on the moon, but then
Yeah.
you're going to turn to the space team or the space division or NASA here in the US and say, what do you think? And then you've got all the engineers that say, I got an idea. I think we can do that because, and then away you go.
Okay. But it's galvanizing those conversations and really interesting, really interesting. Can we turn to this question of new business teams versus, a lot of people talk about account management teams, or I know in financial services you normally say relationship management teams. And some people talk about hunters and farmers.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure about that. What's your take on?
I don't like the way that sounds, Steve.
Okay.
The farmers sound like you're just sitting around and sort of making things just sort of go along, whereas the hunters are active and working. A lot of times the relationship team is called retention. I really don't like that word. My company changed the word to relationship development.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, you have an existing customer. You want to expand the work that you're doing with them, or that share of wallet aspect.
Yes.
It's not the new business people. The new business people are looking for new logos or brand new clients.
Yeah.
And it's great seeing both of them, managing both of them, again, flexing your own style as the manager,
Yes.
because they're a variation on the same theme. You know,
Okay.
if you bring in a new client, we pop champagne, that's awesome. But if you renew a contract with an existing customer and you get a 5% increase and they're buying another product, that's pretty great. Because it's once you lose a client, it's very hard to bring them back again. You want to keep that portfolio as intact as possible. So you've got the new business people putting new clients in the top of the funnel, but you don't want anybody going down the back, dropping out the bottom of the funnel. You want, and that's the relationship team, making sure that they're here and staying, and you're listening well.
Yes.
I think the difference between managing two people, Steve, is usually the cadence of the sales process.
Oh, okay.
Because with new business people, I feel they're trying to keep in contact. Again, you're managing all those tables at your station in the restaurant.
Yeah.
But suddenly someone says, I'm really thinking I'd love to try that bottle of wine.
Okay.
You've got to stop, run back to the wine steward, have him or her come over to the table, and that's something sudden, and it's new business opportunity, bang.
Yeah.
Whereas relationship, I'm assuming that we're already involved with the customer. Mm-hmm. And if we go to Neil Rackham and consultative selling process and all that great stuff, which is another great book to read. That changes,
again, I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah.
That changes over time period where they are with you, they're a satisfied customer for what you just sold them. But as you continue to work with them, their work need or their lives change, the company changes, their needs change. Yeah. If you're involved with them already, you start to hear about that as they start thinking about what they need. And if you're embedded in there already, chances are they're not going to put it out for proposal to someone else.
Yeah.
You're going to get a good deal, so to speak. The pricing will be good because they see you as value add into their decision process.
Yes.
So the cadence is slower, but there is a lot of work as you go along. You're not neglecting anyone.
Yes.
So you can see the parallels between the two, but just a little bit different flexing or of their cadence. And then as your leadership, I have to be able to drop over here and run over there.
Right.
So that can be back and forth as well. But I found that a fun challenge.
Do you think, fundamentally, new business salespeople and relationship managers, are they different in their makeup? Do you look for different things when you recruit for different roles?
I would say yes.
Okay.
And only on a couple of things. New business people, I want to see time of the essence.
Okay.
You feel that as you're speaking to them. And also, I actually had one new business person actually run the interview like a sales meeting. And at the end, he asked for the business. He said, I really want this job. I think I can do well. I'm looking forward to working with you. Yeah. He asked for the business.
Okay.
That's a new business guy.
I'm a sucker for somebody who does that to me. I'm bowled over by the professionalism that sometimes isn't the best way to make a decision, but yeah.
And with that, I had that person interview with two other people and say, is this too good to be true, or is this the real deal? With relationship people, I see a depth of thoughtfulness, of thinking a little bit more deeply. They usually ask me a question like, so what do you mean by that? I hear that. That's interesting, but where's that coming from? And how does your team work that way? And not to say the new business people are, ready, fire, aim. That's not the point at all.
Sure.
But their need to get in there, their need to find you feel this, I want to go, I want to go, I want to go. Both of those people want to go out to the client or prospect. They don't want to sit back. But there's that makeup of the individual. Then it blends beautifully with that cadence I was talking about, the sales process.
Okay. Yeah.
And therefore, you can also see sometimes the relationship person thinks more 360 or more to the side about what other team should I be bringing in here because they have the time to do that.
Yes.
The new business people, it's usually like, here's the opportunity, the RFP comes in, we have to answer it really quickly, and then they're off and running, kind of thing. So a little bit different.
Okay, and interesting. And as you manage them, are you tracking different things? Do you use different KPIs, different metrics when you're dealing with new business versus account management? So how does that work for you?
In my last role, what we did was, and some individuals started thinking about this. I didn't come up with all this by myself, but especially during the pandemic, it was, what was the volume we were sending outbound? Were they emails? Were they phone call outreaches? And then we were looking at the hit rate. Who opened it? You can open it, but did you read it? And that's the level of contact that you're getting, even though you couldn't get somebody on the phone.
Yes.
Because all of our clients were struggling like crazy just to keep their own businesses running. So as new business, were you getting some traction? With relationship people, it's, did you get a chance? Did you speak to them, and how?
Yeah.
And so I was tracking face-to-face meetings as well as telephone calls or Zoom. Those three, because again, the level of context.
Yeah.
Usually, so a phone call usually winds up being, I have a question, here's the answer. Zoom and face-to-face is much more broad, like our conversation here, Steve. It can go in many different directions. You don't know where you might be going, which then gives you all sorts of ideas of where to go next with the client.
Yes.
So that's, and of course with the new business guys, it's new business.
Right.
And also normally, and I was never in an environment where we were commission only, and that's a totally different story. So some of your other speakers might be able to speak to that. But they have to come in and they have to stay. So it's got to be, yes, the contract goes for 3 years, but sometimes people feel a contract is an opportunity to negotiate. So if they're not happy within 8 months, they might try to get out of it. Well, that wasn't a good sale then. That was a sale just for the sake of the sale. So we have to make sure that the quality of inbound is going to be somebody, don't throw it over to the relationship people and say, oh, your problem now. No. So that's how we were balancing that off.
Right. And do you have you experienced where you have hybrid teams where you've got some people who are both a bit of new business and a bit of relationship management?
Yeah.
Do you think that works?
Steve, I think it has to do with what your product is and what your market is.
Okay.
If you need subject matter expertise, I think it's good to have hybrid. I was in that role in banking. I was in the extractive industries, oil, gas, mining. So I was the new guy as well as the relationship guy. A small market, small industry, everybody knew each other by first name. When I walked into to a customer or a prospect, we usually spent the first 20 minutes asking what the other guys were doing in the business.
Right.
Did you talk to Steve? Did you talk to Bob? How's Jane doing? So they were establishing your credibility in the industry first.
Absolutely.
And then we started talking about specifics. Now, I had an engineer working with me who was really the subject matter expert. But if you're in any type of engineering, if you're speaking to Boeing and you are a service provider or you are somewhere in their supply chain, they want to make sure you understand what they do. That's where that hybrid might come in. If you have a product which is transactional and it's like you get it, you're done, there's really no follow-up, you can have a big new business crew but not necessarily need to do the relationship.
Sure. No, okay, I get that. And clearly what I see at the moment is customers are getting smarter. They are demanding that we serve their real business needs, not just give them a product or a service. So that ability to really understand their business, their challenges, the pressures on them, that points to having people specialize in verticals or whatever. But as you say, so you can actually have those real conversations with them. Especially
as a lot of information can be found on the internet, so to speak, where they they almost cut out a salesperson. But especially with a complex business-to-business sale, I feel the value of a new business person or relationship person is I want to make sure that this fits for you. Because if you buy something that doesn't make sense to you, you're going to be really angry at me. That's not the point here. A fast no is just as important as a yes. If that's not the right thing, I'd rather tell the client, I don't think this is going to work for you. I don't have what you need right now, but I think it's better that we have this conversation right now, and I think that's very important. And that's where I think the salesperson comes in as the knowledge base beyond what you can read just on a screen.
But again, I mean, that takes some courage to both ask the questions and give that position to, particularly when, I mean, many people are finding it tough right now in, most markets, but to give that no and to say, actually, I don't think we're 100% right for you right now. Better to talk to us at another stage. That takes some courage for a lot of salespeople and sales managers to back them up.
And that can be a challenge too. And a correlation or a variation on that theme is I would call up a client who just left us.
Right.
And I would say, I'd love to change your mind and have you stay. But most importantly, I'd love to know why you're leaving.
Okay.
Explain to me, was it the product? Was it the process? Where was that? Because I would like to improve. So one, I'd like to win you back at some point. But also, I want to make sure that we're doing the best job we can. And it's interesting how disarming that conversation could be. And remember, I'm talking to treasurers and CFOs.
Right.
And very demanding, very smart people.
Yeah.
And to let them have the opportunity, and they didn't necessarily just vent. That wasn't the case. A lot of them had very thoughtful responses.
Yes.
And that was also sometimes difficult to bring to senior leadership. To say, don't shoot the messenger. I just spoke to the CFO. And she just told me this is the reason why. And sometimes it's like, we just really feel we don't need this anymore. Okay.
Right.
Thanks. We hope to come back to you soon.
Yeah,
So again, those two conversations going upwards can be very difficult to explain.
Yes. But I mean, for me, it's criminal that people just don't have those conversations. And we don't learn, we don't get better. But it's difficult to have the conversation, but then to relay it back upwards. But that's how we develop.
And again, as the sales manager, quite often that fell to me. I said I would take it off of the direct salesperson or the direct relationship manager and say, I got this. I'll take over. I've got a lot more credibility, so to speak, or gravitas, so I can come in and have that conversation. And also, I wasn't part of the negotiations or the part of the trying to save the client base or the client. So it made it much more objective.
Yes.
And even if they had subjective reasons, again, asking the question, well, why do you feel that way? What was the decision process to do that?
Yes.
And but then that's a learning situation, because quite often I would have the direct sales manager on the conversation as well, so he or she could listen to that. So they can have that conversation next time. Yeah.
But often it is difficult because there's probably a personal relationship built up, and the customer and the salesperson, the customer might not want to say things in front of the salesperson where they've had lots of interaction, particularly if it's an existing account.
And that's where I take the cue from the salesperson. How should we progress with this? What do you feel comfortable with? How do you think they would feel comfortable with it?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And presumably you'd also have some kind of internal debrief as well, based on that. What could we have done differently? All that. Which again,
that's the next step, because I want to hear. This was our perception of what went on, but again, if their perception is their reality in a situation, I need to have their perception as part of our internal debriefing.
Yes. Okay, it does strike me for new sales managers who are listening to this or viewing this that that's one quite quick win you can get, is to instigate that kind of post-mortem with the customer and internally, not to be vindictive, but to learn, and you can get so much come out of that. Scott, I've got another question I'm going to ask you, but sure. I'd like to just summarize this bit. So if you had to give, let's say, 3 bits of advice for new sales managers, yeah, overall, these are the three things to think about as you move into the role. What would they be?
Some of the things I didn't do really well the first time around, I will tell you.
Okay, we're going to come to that with your biggest mistake in a minute, but
one is to learn how to delegate, because just like the sales leader doesn't have all the answers,
yeah,
you also don't have all the time.
Yeah.
So there could be, and that will, if you don't delegate, then it will lead to the second problem, which is a tip, is to prioritize. And I've heard it many times, if you have a vase and you have to figure out what to put into the vase, the big balls go in first, the most important thing. You tackle that first. Then you put in the next balls, et cetera, and so forth, and finally you pour in the sand that fills in all the space.
Yes.
But you as the sales leader have to figure out what size that issue is and which one you need to tackle first. Yeah. And that's, again, a listening tour real quickly around. To the team, to the leadership, what's the one thing you need me to tackle first?
Yeah.
And then, again, we talked about listening, so that's sort of table stakes here. But the third thing I would say is, one of my bosses said to me, you need to block off time on your calendar to think.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, okay, because you're going. If you don't have a chance to step back and have a think on something, you might miss it. Yeah. And you feel there's so much that you need to be doing, and you feel so much responsibility. It's everybody. We had a shared calendar. Everybody could see when I was available or not.
Right.
So I would block it off, and it's not like, oh, I'm going out for lunch. It's more that this is the time I need. And sometimes if I'm going into a very large meeting, I will block the 30 minutes prior,
for sure,
so I can prepare for that meeting. So things like that. My communication style, that's another thing. Explain to your team how you like to be communicated to. So when I joined the new company and the team, I said, I'm a phone guy. Pick up the phone. Don't text, don't email me. Just give me a call. And let's talk it through. Because for me, I hear your voice inflection. I hear how fast you're speaking. I can tell you're worried, or I can tell you're comfortable. That it's just much more efficient and effective. You can still text me. And when we had Zoom, I would get a pop. It's like, hey, you got a minute? And suddenly, ping, somebody shows up. But Zoom was the same. It's like having a phone call, but I can see you. But that was my level of communication with my team. And I said, don't worry about interrupting me. If I'm not available, I'll tell you that. But if I blocked the calendar, they knew I wasn't going to get a hold of them at that point.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I mean, all of those, but that thing about, because I see lots of new sales managers, they're not short of things to do. There's always another person you can spend more time with, another customer you can talk to, another process you can try and fix. But you have to manage your time and look after yourself, and as you say, give yourself time to prepare for things. Otherwise, you're just running around, and it gets crazy. I see a lot of sales managers getting into a spiral downwards in those first few months.
Yeah. And the idea of taking care of yourself, you still might get home late for dinner, but you won't completely miss dinner because you had that chance to think a little bit. So the rest of your day would be much more effective. And there's still things you do. It's not a 9-to-5 job anymore. You're always thinking of something that needs to be done or you want to do before the end of the day. But this really does give you a chance to be much more efficient with what you do tackle during the day, I think.
I mean, everybody I speak to, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's, but you shouldn't be working, into the evening every single evening. Sometimes, okay, we're going to take a very quick break there. And then when we come back, I'm going to ask you about your biggest mistake and your biggest triumph.
Okay.
Bonus question.
So Scott, what was the biggest mistake that comes to mind as a sales manager, and what did you learn from that?
I think I mentioned it previously, Steve, but I can go in a little bit more depth.
Okay.
It was spending too much time on an underperformer,
Right.
or a problem child.
Yeah.
I was spending way too much time face-to-face joint calls, looking for individual trainings. I realized I started doing a lot of the work for them in order to prepare for client meetings and other things. And I realized they weren't doing anything because I was doing all of it. So
Right.
I wound up taking on the responsibilities. And that person was
Right.
sort of gliding underneath and was not taking ownership of the situation.
Okay.
But in the meantime, the rest of the team was getting mad at me, literally.
Yeah.
I wasn't available to have a conversation with them. I couldn't join call with them. The high performer that I did have, who was fantastic, was saying, "What are you doing?" to me. And I was close enough that he could say, "What the heck is going on here?"
Yeah.
And you can't say anything because of privacy about another individual, but I realized that I was spending way too much time, too much effort, too much management time, upwards as well. And when we finally accessed that individual, there was a sigh of relief across the entire team, because they saw what was happening but didn't want to tell me, which was, again, a trust thing, that they didn't want to. They felt that it really wasn't their place to say something about another person, which is fair. I get it. But it was a collective sigh of relief, and then looking to hire another person, hiring a junior person, and being able to train them up, and that person, the personality, it was a good fit into the team, and she went on to do extremely well. But that was, I should have recognized that I was being pulled into a morass that I should not have gone as far into it, and I should have cut it sooner.
And is the learning that you should have exited the person sooner, or you should have tackled it in a different way? Could you have turned them around, or, I mean, we never know, do we? But
I don't know whether I could have turned them around. The one thing I should have done a little bit sooner is brought in my HR team. Because they are much more wary of how to do a personal improvement plan, which a lot of companies have, to put a person on notice. How did that work? I wasn't as familiar as a new manager with that process. If I had known that process, it would have given much more structure to being more objective. And I would suggest to any manager, make friends with your HR professional. They are invaluable.
Absolutely.
And they can also help you, even with talent development. They can bring you in and bring you into the sphere of that side of the business and that side of your need for your team. But the HR team are a very, very good partner. And I brought them in too late.
That's a really good. I mean, I've always enjoyed really good relationships with HR people, and they've seen everything. And they can look at just some bald facts. And we're emotionally invested as well, often. So make friends with them, take their counsel, and they've got the tools and the processes as well.
Again, they're the subject matter expert with that. Why was I struggling trying to figure it out by myself?
Interesting. And I'm presuming you got into that position, and I can empathise with that. You do it for the best of reasons. You really want to help the person, but you do get sucked into it.
And it can be you have the conversation where you truly like the person. But if they can't fulfill the responsibilities or the obligations of the position, that's where, and I've started learning this after years. Are they in the wrong role? Should you suggest they look for other roles within the company? And this is where HR helped me with another person. I'm not sure whether this is the right fit for this person. Is there somewhere else within the company that we could suggest? And one person did make a change, and they wound up going to a research role and knocked the ball out of the park. I guess I'm not sure how that challenge, whether it could be cricket or U.S. baseball, but nonetheless,
I understand that.
they really did flourish. So and that's sometimes a hard conversation to have with someone.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of these things, I think we've said it a couple of times, as a manager, you do need that moral courage to kind of do the right thing, to have the hard conversations when it's necessary.
Yeah.
Okay, that fascinating. What about your biggest triumph? What are you most proud of, Scott? To finish on a positive note.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of salespeople would say I brought in IBM or I brought in, BP or something like that. I'll tell the story and real quickly. A new business person joined my last company, and after about a month, she turned to the person who she was sitting next to, because we're on a trading floor format, and she said, "Why do so many people want to work with Scott?" And his response to her was, "Give it another 2 months, it'll be pretty obvious."
Okay.
And the reason was people wanted to work on my team. They wanted to work with me. And I didn't have any open recs, but people kept asking to join the team. And came to find out leadership said, people like working with you because your team is cohesive, they feel comfortable talking with you, and they feel like they're succeeding underneath you. And
right.
I didn't know, honestly, I didn't know it. It's just like I was just going about, I don't want to say day to day, but how I felt my style of leadership seemed to be working, and asking people and being collaborative and all of that. And the team grew to double its size since I joined, because all these other people were coming over. And that's when this person came over to me and said, that's when they relayed the story. 3 months later. And I was like,
okay.
I said, and that made me feel really good. That validated, because you can have a lot of self-doubt about, am I really doing this the right way? Are we really making any progress? Do the people feel comfortable working with me? What am I doing wrong? It's much easier to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing wrong? And when somebody comes over and says, people just don't like working with you, but they like the way you work with them. And to me, I felt like that was my biggest triumph.
That says a lot about you as well, Scott. But I think that's so nice, because to maybe come back to where we started, sales management for me anyway it is about you're achieving results through other people, and it's working with those other people, and we can hit targets and bring in accounts, and hopefully we've had a lot to do with it, but there's lots of other things about how people respond to you as their manager. That really is a tribute to you. And it just points to, that's the heart of the sales management role, for me at least. I think
it is. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Scott, it's been an absolute delight, I have to say. There's been so much we've covered. I've made lots and lots of notes. Hopefully, new sales managers will get a lot from there. Well, they should. I've learned a lot. So I just wanted to say thank you. Any final words of advice that you'd give to, aspiring new sales managers?
Maybe the one thing I haven't mentioned is find some sort of affinity group that does your function. I fell into something called Strategic Account Management Association, or SAMA. It's in the US. It's quite strong. I don't know about in Europe or other parts of the world, but it wound up being such a sounding board. They would have an annual conference, and the topics discussed, and it wasn't just talking about strategic companies. I met so many different sales leaders and team leaders and team managers, learned so much. Again, all that white space, meeting them for a drink, having breakfast with them. I think, again, any way you can find some other way to find out information about where you're going. Book learning is terrific, but hearing people, their real life examples, their triumphs and their failures, it's inspiring and it's invigorating. So that would be something I'd also recommend to the new salespeople.
Okay. SAMA, I know, is stronger in the US than it is in Europe, but there's a lot of online stuff. But don't do it by yourself. There's so much you can learn from others through things like SAMA or management meetings or whatever.
And also the other interviews that you've done, I would highly recommend them. They're all a variation on certain themes that those individuals had some great ideas, and I really enjoyed listening to them.
Okay, we've been really fortunate that a lot of great people have given up their time, as you have today, and we do training and all that stuff, which is, I hope, very valuable. But hopefully, it is this real life experience from different perspectives, and not everybody works the same way or has the same opinion. But well, I'm learning a lot. I'm enjoying it, and we just hope that new sales managers will as well. Scott, thank you ever so much. Thank you once again.
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. It's terrific. I've enjoyed it, our conversation.
Okay. Cheers. Thanks. If you're an aspiring, new or developing sales manager in complex business to business, or if you know someone who is, you may want to go to www.realsalesmanager.com. That's www.realsalesmanager, all one word, .com, to learn about our unique blend of training and coaching to help aspiring sales managers to decide if it's right for them and how to go about getting a job, to help new sales managers get as effective as possible, as quickly as possible, and to help developing sales managers with a personalized program to improve specific skills.